Thank you so much for staying with us. Let's get into our very first impact, which takes us to Uganda, where Ugandan opposition leader Bobi Wine, real name Robert Kyagulanyi, has withdrawn his case in court. That's the Supreme Court, challenging the presidential election result that handed victory to incumbent President Museveni. He has alleged bias by Supreme Court justices hearing the case. Now, Wine had rejected the results of the January 14th presidential election and said he believed victory was stolen from him, asking the court to overturn the results on several grounds, including the widespread use of violence.
In a press conference in Kampala yesterday, he said that he had decided to withdraw his case, claiming that the courts are not independent and the judges are working for the President Museveni. Now, Museveni, a former guerrilla leader who has led the East African country since 1986, was declared the winner of the January 14th election with 59% of the vote, while Bobi Wine won 35% of the votes.
Now, while many Ugandans are processing Wine's decision, there have been reports of people being picked up by vehicles that Ugandans are calling drones. We'll also get into that as well.
But our guest this morning is Jackson Mwesi-gua. He's a Ugandan lawyer and political analyst who joins us now from Kampala, the Ugandan capital. Jackson, good morning to you. Welcome to Breakfast Central.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us. So we've seen some of the accusations that Bobi Wine has leveled against electoral authorities. He's accused them of declaring cooked up results as well as other things. On what grounds did Bobi Wine take his petition to the Supreme Court before we talk about the withdrawal?
You know, we've had elections before where we've had such a kind of scenarios, but there wasn't anything new in this very petition. But answering your first question, we had elections on January 14th, but these elections were marked by violence, by, many killings on the streets of Kampala and the outskirts of the capital. And so the election basically wasn't free and fair. And remember, this was an election prepared during the coronavirus pandemic. So they had, Electoral Commission had set rules that there wouldn't be open campaigns, that they would only allow small gatherings. But then later, Bobi Wine and the group and the rest of the opposition opted for mass rallies. So there were a lot of clashes with security agencies in the context of observing, standard operating procedures. And this made this whole election violent. And so while enforcing standard operating procedures administered by the Electoral Commission, they restricted many movements of opposition. And so from the results of the election, Bobi Wine and the rest of the opposition groups rejected the outcome of the election.
Okay.
All right, Jackson. But now he has withdrawn his election petition. He said in a tweet that, quote, the court has manifested unprecedented bias, partiality and double standards. Declining our request to file evidence was the last stroke. He said we are taking the case to the court of the people. Now, looking at the why, do you think Bobi Wine is justified? Could he have received a fair and impartial hearing before the Supreme Court or not?
First of all, I would like to make some clarification.
Okay.
Bobi Wine hasn't withdrawn from the case. His lawyers filed for a petition. They petitioned the court to withdraw that. To withdraw the application.
Okay.
But the lawyer is very clear. The court decides whether the case should be withdrawn or not. Okay. So his lawyers the other time filed for the withdrawal of the application, and we are waiting. And actually, they told him to first gazette it, to be published in the Uganda Gazette, so that now court can sit down and start hearing whether indeed this case should be withdrawn. So it's on Thursday this week that the Supreme Court will sit to hear that application and finally decide whether Kyagulanyi, Bobi Wine, can be, allowed to withdraw the case. So it hasn't yet been withdrawn, but his lawyers have filed for the withdrawal of the application.
Okay. So you've answered the next question, but sort of going back to that question now, do you think, looking at the situation of things, that Bobi Wine could have had an impartial, fair, bias-free hearing in front of the Supreme Court on the issues he raised about the last election?
Bobi Wine was raising very pertinent issues because even the Supreme Court in 2016, the case of the then opposition candidate, the then presidential candidate, the leading opposition candidate, Dr. Besigye. The Supreme Court made a decision in that very case when he filed it against President Museveni after, the Electoral Commission had declared still that President Museveni had won. The Supreme Court put up some changes. Of course, it was ruled in favor of the ruling government, in favor of President Museveni. But there are some recommendations that were made by the Supreme Court. There are several changes that were requested by Supreme Court, to be implemented. But most of them, they were not worked on. And so the very issues that were raised in 2016 are some of the very issues that Kyagulanyi had raised in this very petition. Number one, the current Chief Justice, Alfonso Owiny-Dolo, was a personal lawyer of President Museveni in 2016. And now he is the Supreme Court judge who is going to be sitting in a case where his former client is a party. So Bobi Wine is saying this cannot be allowed, that this is a Supreme Court judge who was a personal lawyer to the party, to this case, and so he cannot decide the case. He cannot be impartial in this very case. So they filed that the Chief Justice should excuse himself from this case, and of course, the court couldn't accept that. And then secondly, most of the witnesses that were going to be presented to court by Kyagulanyi's lawyer have been arrested by security agencies. They have been abducted. And so Kyagulanyi is saying, with such a kind of situations, he doesn't see any reason why he should, run to a court which he doesn't believe in.
Okay.
All right, Jackson. Solomon Muyita, who is a judiciary spokesman, he said they will only respond to Bobi Wine's accusations and decision to withdraw the case when he has formally quit the case through his lawyers, describing his comments as a political statement and that the case is still in court. What actually does that mean, these comments from the judiciary spokesman?
I beg your pardon? Beg your pardon on the question?
Yes, I'm talking about the judiciary spokesman in the name of Solomon Muyita. Now, he said that they will only respond to Wine's accusations and decision to withdraw the case when he has formally quit the case through his lawyers, and he's described his comments as a political statement and that the case is still in court. What does that mean from this one, from Solomon?
The spokesperson made those comments before Honorable Kyagulanyi's lawyers had formally filed for the withdrawal of the application.
Okay.
And so, of course, that's the procedure of court. Bobi Wine made those statements before his lawyers filed for the withdrawal of the petition.
Okay.
And so a few days later, we saw that his lawyers going ahead to file for the application. But then court decided that, no, you must first gazette this, application to be heard so that it can be heard by the court. And so the other day, the lawyers of Bobi Wine formally filed for the withdrawal of the case, and the Supreme Court has set Thursday as the first day when they will start hearing whether indeed this case should be withdrawn by Kyagulanyi's lawyers.
All right, so let's talk about some of the president's comments. Now, President Museveni has dismissed the allegations of vote rigging, calling the election the most cheating-free since independence from Britain in 1962. Do the majority of Ugandans support the president's statement? How do they feel about him describing this election in particular as the most cheating-free election, given the run-up that we saw, the violence we saw? Even when Bobi Wine was submitting another petition to the United Nations office in Kampala, we saw the excessive violence meted out on journalists. So pre-election, during election, and post-election, there have been issues. So how do Ugandans feel about the president's statement?
First of all, it's not a surprise that the president is making such a statement, because however much we talk about the elections in Uganda, Uganda has never had a peaceful transition of power. President Museveni came in power in 1986 through a coup, and he has ruled since then, using elections as a camouflage. And so President Museveni uses elections to just cover up his military rule. But in real sense, it's the military that is ruling here. Immediately after the elections, the offices of Bobi Wine, the headquarters, were cordoned off. And as I talk, since January 14th, Kyagulanyi and his team have never accessed, their offices. And so we see heavy military presence in Kampala, several abductions, especially, for most of the members of Bobi Wine's, camp. And so President Museveni's comments are just a reflection of who he is, who we know he is. And so that's not big news here. He's a military leader who is just using democracy to maybe portray to the Western world that look, that there's some bit of democracy in Uganda. But I don't expect anything, big to come out of even this court hearing. And Museveni will, try to use this to cement his military rule.
All right, Jackson. Well, what's the general sentiment regarding, Wine's withdrawing his petition? What is the general sentiment from Ugandans about this latest move from Bobi Wine?
Bobi Wine has made it clear that the fact that he offered himself for an election, which he claims was rigged, and then he has tried to go to courts of law, which he has really failed to, gain enough trust, and now finally saying he's going into the people's court. He wants to throw it to the people, and what that means here is that we could, see some bit of violence in the future, because we already see on social media. Remember, Facebook is still restricted here. We are not allowed to access Facebook, maybe for those who can access VPN. And so his team is very clear that if elections cannot be free and fair, if courts of law cannot, offer him the alleged win from the previous election, then he's going to the people's court, and it will be up to the people of Uganda to decide whether power can get back to them, and not, being grabbed by the current regime.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Your last statements, being grabbed by the current regime. You also mentioned abductions. And if you follow Ugandan social media, we've been seeing those tweets about drones, and not drones in the typical sense. What we've been seeing is that people have alleged that even before the elections, Ugandans, particularly supporters of Bobi Wine, were picked up in vans by security agents and taken wherever they were taken. So we've seen many reports that the police have said they are not with any of these individuals. They don't know anything about the missing persons, but some who have come out have said that they were beaten, they were tortured, and then eventually dropped in isolated areas and dark roads at night. What's this situation going on with this drone situation in Uganda?
There's a lot that is happening here. We saw the other day the UN calling for sanctions against some individuals in security agencies in Uganda. We saw the spokesperson of the U.S. Secretary of State making some statement about action to be taken on certain individuals in Uganda, especially security personnel. And so there is a lot happening in terms of security. But coming back to your very question, we've seen several abductions, and some of these people are thrown back to their homes after a week or two, highly tortured, tormented. And so we know that depending on what is what is coming up, people are going to still be abducted by the regime so as to scare them, because the president is scared. The incumbent government is so scared of Kyagulanyi and his team. These are young, energetic people. Most of them who are unemployed. They have nothing to lose, and so they are ready to go on the streets. And so what security agencies are doing is identifying them. Actually, what is surprising, that they are identifying them through social media. You post something which sounds to be so critical of government, the security agencies hunt for you, arrest you, abduct you, torture you, and then when maybe the habeas corpus is filed by the lawyers of Kyagulanyi to produce the bodies of those people, whether dead or alive, what security agencies do, they just come and drop that person in any destination, and they help that person. I mean, they leave that person there helpless.
All right, Jackson, sorry, very quickly before we go. So I have seen a statement from the Minister of Internal Affairs, and he finally did admit that security operatives were actually using the vehicles called drones to pick up people. He says that it's because these security operatives, and he said that they were overzealous, that there's going to be an investigation and those who are guilty will be prosecuted. Do you have any faith in his statement?
There are two contradicting statements from security agencies. One, the Army commander last time, like 2 weeks ago, Honorable Kyagulanyi and the team wanted to file a petition to the UN calling for sanctions. And so they wanted to hold a procession And in the process, most journalists who were covering Kyagulanyi were beaten up, were tortured. And so the army commander came up and apologized. And we saw some few, security, personnel. We saw some officers being brought before the army court, which we don't know how it operates. They were brought within a day, but their commanders, actually the junior officers, were brought before court, and their commanders were not. So they were, sentenced some to 6 months to 1 year in jail for torturing journalists. But then we asked ourselves, how come the commanders? Because even the commander was identified, but he was not brought to the army court. But then people don't believe in army courts. These are kangaroo courts that don't even follow the law. They only follow orders. And so that was the statement from the army. What is important there is that the army commander came up and apologized and promised to bring those officers who had, tortured journalists to book. And indeed he did so. But then the Minister of Internal Affairs comes up and says, you know what? Some of these actions are individual actions. But then there's also need to constrain these efforts by the opposition to cause chaos in Kampala. And so the minister is saying, you know what? We need to keep peace, which they claim they have preserved for the last 35 years. And he's saying the security agencies are there to make sure that there is peace in the country, and they'll continue to do so in any way. So those are two contradicting statements coming, one from the army commander and then another one from the minister. And so we wait to see which one precedes the other.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jackson Mwesi-gua, Ugandan lawyer and political affairs activist, for joining us live from Kampala. Thank you very much, Jackson, once again on Breakfast Central.
And thank you so much for having me.
All right, as always.
Definitely. And as it is, he said that it's Thursday or Tuesday? I think I'm getting old. Thursday that the Supreme Court will start hearing the case or the petition now for Bobi Wine to withdraw. There's more procedure involved than many people thought. So it's interesting to hear how that is and to see what plays out. And then on this drone issue, the kidnappings, the abductions have continued. There are allegations of torture by security agencies saying that either it's independent security agents working on their own or with orders. Whatever it is, it's really leading to a heightened state of fear and insecurity in Kampala.
Especially this is post-election anxiety in Uganda. Wow, really terrible, you have to say. Well, it's still Breakfast Central with Olisa Chukuma and Tolulokbaya Dylan Balogu. Don't forget you can catch us on social media at News Central TV. We're live and also on YouTube, and also catch us on our website, www.newscentral.africa. A quick break we do, and when we come back, there's lots to talk about in the world of business, and you don't want to miss that out. Do stay with us.